Have you guys seen Bird Box?
Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Happy New Year, you two. Happy New Year. How was the holidays? How was the break? You survived, I see. Sarah, what do you got to say for yourself?
We had a good break, actually. It was nice. We stayed home for the most part, and rested a lot and ate a lot. And, last year we had like an emergency room visit with our daughter. We did not have any emergency room visits this year. So, that was a vast improvement just in and of itself.
A low bar, but you passed it.
First year my husband's been home on Christmas Day, since we were married.
Nice.
I think. Yeah. So we actually got to have Christmas as a family. We have a retired priest who just lends a hand here and there. And he just stepped in and said, I'm going to do Christmas Day. So it was really nice.
That's awesome.
That's a great gift. What about you, Arch? Did you miss me?
Oh, duh, obviously. Yeah. We had a pretty intense Christmas. The whole family flew up to New York and was with my brothers, for, I guess, 4 or 5 days. And then worked that week, and then did have a good week off last week. We were out of town, then came home, and our dishwasher was broken, and our furnace was broken, and my son's car wouldn't start. And so, anyway, good to be back. We did have a nice Christmas and a nice New Year's, and back in the flow here a little bit, and things are settling down. It's a beautiful day today. I'm happy to be back at work. Actually, I love what I do. And good to be back with you guys. So 2019, baby, let's do this.
It's going to be what I have a feeling. I immediately thought that we're going to definitely title this episode New Year, Same Us.
Mm-hmm.
Same Mockingcast.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
same Jesus too. Good news, right? He didn't change his agenda.
Yeah.
I hope not.
That's the crucial element in all of this.
Right.
We here we had a good Christmas. I think Christmas with 3 little ones is both magical and absolutely draining in every conceivable way, and so it's full of joy and tears. And by the time you get back to the office, it feels like a vacation. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
That's really true.
It's not woe is me. It's a privilege to be raising these children, but man, oh man, were we happy for that school bus to drive down our block?
Yes.
I'm building up treasures in heaven, guys.
That's right.
That's my MO in 2019.
Jewels in your crown.
But Sarah, I know that your MO in 2019 might be a little different. I hear word on the street, according to the Mockingbird website, is that you are going boundaryless.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're not you're driving on the wrong side of the road?
That's right. All the rules are thrown out the window. This piece has been on my heart for a little while because it started for me in seminary where boundary talk about having good boundaries and, if someone's difficult, you just need to put up a boundary, was a very popular way to educate seminarians, still is. And even now, if you're in clergy groups, and people might talk about a difficult person at their church, it's often well, you just need to have a firmer boundary, And find a new word. I'm sick of that one. But B, this really was a more personal sort of heart thing for me that I'm kind of sick of people saying that they need more boundaries and better boundaries. And because I feel like it's antithetical to the gospel. One thing RJ talks about a lot that I think of often is that we're not, and I've written about this too, we're not promised safety as Christians at all. We're sort of promised the opposite. And we so often will slip, and when I say we, I especially mean ordained people, will slip into this behavior of sort of shutting people off. And often and I write about this in the piece, but it's people who are maybe mentally ill, or they're just difficult, or maybe you're difficult and you don't want to deal with them. And so
Mm.
instead of facing any of that truth of who they are or who you are, we're like, well, you just need to put up a firm boundary. It's interesting. I saw a little bit of the reaction to it on social media. My least favorite way people begin comments on articles, just for all you listeners out there, if you want to really get on my nerves, is to start by saying no. And like on anything, like when people start, like they literally write and they literally like no. And I got a little bit of that. I don't think they actually read the piece, to be honest with you, because I do acknowledge, I mean, there are certain moments in our lives that we have to think about. I don't know if boundary is the right word, but we have to think about how to best love this person that is in a difficult way. And I mean, there's a lot of sort of the old mentality of, for example, handling people who are addicts, right, was to just kind of like shut them off completely. And there's less of that now in the culture that tries to help people with addiction. So I don't know. I think it's something that I really bristle every single time I'm in a church context and someone talks about boundaries.
Well, it sounds like what I came across from the piece is that what you're saying is that it's like a euphemism for rejection,
Yes.
almost, or not, or just judgment.
It's a
but
nice
just
way
really,
of rejecting. I mean, it makes you feel justified pastorally in rejecting someone, because you can be like, well, I put up a boundary, and
self-care.
I mean, I would love, it would just be funny if people were honest. If they're just like, well, he's an asshole and he keeps interrupting my meetings. You know what I mean? Like, I would much rather hear a priest say that or pastor say that than be like, I put up a boundary. Plus, it sounds like you're sitting on a mountain and in charge of things, and we're clearly not. So,
What do you think about this, RJ? I mean, as someone against whom I've put up several boundaries in my life.
I work closely with RJ. I have never heard him say better boundaries ever.
Just kidding.
I've never heard
Isn't
you
he
say
an
that.
We've established that you're an oversharer. Are you a non-boundary? Are you a boundaryless oversharer?
Oh, it's hard. I would say that I probably put up more quote unquote boundaries, although I'm not going to use that word because it's trite and overused, as you said, than I used to, because I feel like I tried to be boundaryless and I got killed. And this is my theory. I don't really want to be on a pedestal. I don't. But when you are in a position of quote unquote spiritual leadership, people kind of want you there. They want you on a pedestal. They want to believe and think that you're somehow better than they are, or more holy, or that you have something to teach them about being a better person. And when they discover that you're not actually, they'll kind of rip you to shreds. And I agree with everything you said, Sarah, about Jesus and his boundaryless existence. But I remember maybe 5 years ago or something, I was teaching a Sunday school class, and for some reason, the thing that Jesus says about not casting your pearls before swine entered my head, and for the first time, I understood what that meant, because I felt like I'd sort of done that, like I'd cast my pearls before swine, and they had turned and they trampled me. And it sucked. It was really, really hard, and I didn't want to be trampled anymore. And I also remember what Jesus said when he sent the disciples out 2 by 2, if you enter a place and it doesn't receive you, then shake the dust off your feet and move on, and I think there's something to be said about that. And the fact that he sent them 2 by 2, that no person in ministry should be alone. Like, I think it's incredibly hard to be in ministry alone. So on the one hand, I completely agree with you. And that's my heart. My heart is that I would want to be boundaryless and to say to people, that, what do they say? Evangelism is one beggar telling another beggar where he found bread, and just being like, hey, I'm a beggar just like you. I found this Jesus guy. I love him. Let's love him together. But I also feel like, in my experience, people over whom you have spiritual authority don't actually want to know that you're a sinner. They don't want to know that. They need to have you a little more lifted up than that. So
That's
that's
interesting.
my
I remember.
experience.
I always have thought that people like my preaching or writing a lot better if they don't actually know me as a human, and if they actually know me as a human, they'll not like my preaching or writing as much, just because of the transference element. They'll enjoy a person.
Transference,
What-
that's the thing, right? Like you can't help but
Transference.
sort of be the daddy.
Your piece reminded me very much of something my father's words resounding in my ears, because he got in kind of hot water for one of his many times when he said, "Boundaries is the law. Boundaries is the law.
Yeah,
I'm
it
against
is.
boundaries. I'm putting up a boundary
Yeah.
against boundaries." And so I, well, but what he was saying, he was taking it to its limit in the way that you've got such a great gift for it, and saying that, like, at the end of the day, we don't, I don't need. I'm not getting into a marriage because I want someone to have good boundaries with me. If God's in the practice of putting up boundaries, then what hope is there for any of us? And that boundaries is not what grace and boundaries are almost antithetical. That said, I'm not Jesus. I'm definitely looking for a boundaryless God, knowing that
Yeah.
I also in my own day to day have to. Uh, I've also seen in myself a pathological need to serve other people
Yes.
that is actually serving my own ego, and
Sure.
my kids sort of pay the price because I was
Jesus
unable
complex.
to say no, and I see that in clergy too.
Mhm.
Um, but
Yeah,
as
I mean,
always,
I guess
I love
But those are
the
different. Yeah, those are different things. Saying no is
I
saying no is not having a boundary necessarily. It's just saying no. You're allowed to say no.
Yeah, I mean, I think about a clergy spouse lunch thing I was at years ago in a diocese far, far away. And one of the women talked about how they had I wasn't even sure it was a parishioner, but somebody who was addicted to heroin, and her husband offered to keep the methadone in the fridge at their house, and they had little kids at home. And I was like, that's a hard pass, lady. So I'm not I'm not advocating for that, but I think what I'm advocating is maybe, well, when I hear the pearls before swine thing, I just assume I'm the swan. But also I'm advocating for,
little glimpse into your psychology.
yeah,
there.
I'm advocating for, when people make us uncomfortable or mad, that maybe that's more about us and less about like them and how we need to react to them. And I think often we miss opportunities in ministry to really be with people because we're like, oh, you make me uncomfortable. Like we can't, I can't be with you. And so, yeah,
I think you definitely identified, just by seeing what I've seen, a little bit of the reaction. You've identified something that people use, a word that people use to justify.
yeah.
Basically,
Not doing their job.
What?
or
Yeah.
not preaching the gospel, or not being
Yes.
gracious or anything.
Yeah.
And we do that with things,
Yeah.
and I wonder what it'll be 5 years from now. But that word boundaries certainly has a connotation.
Yes.
Does it not?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, that's your hope for change this year. RJ, you sent us something, and good luck with that, Sarah, as always.
Thank you. Thank
we will be-
you.
we will
it's
be
already
holding you
going so well. So
We'll be holding you
Yeah.
personally accountable as you
Yes.
develop.
I'll be over
Please
for a
do.
hug right away.
Yeah. I literally yesterday I said to RJ, because he's back from vacation, I was like, I really want to give you a hug, but I'm not going to. So it's going really well, my whole boundaryless thing.
But RJ, you sent out something about how people change. There's it's the beginning of the new year. Everyone's talking about resolutions. And on The Cut, which is over on New York Magazine, Edith Zimmerman wrote something called "How to Change Without Willpower," which I thought was fascinating. This is resonated with you. You said she says, I loved alcohol. It was my friend. It made me happy. It made things funny. It was relaxing. It was what I did. It was what I was good at. It was part of my personality. I also knew it was making me slow, fat, and mean, numb. I was hemorrhaging money. I had no real plans or hopes for the future. I hated looking in the mirror. I had stomach issues. My skin was terrible. Every day felt the same, and it felt in general like I was staring at the ground. I was hiding how much I drank, spreading the truth out so no one knew all of it. No one knew me. For me, this changed the day, the morning, the hour that I realized finally that I no longer loved alcohol. That it wasn't making me happy and ruining my life. It was just ruining my life. I don't know why it happened the day it did. It was a totally nondescript day. It didn't coincide with the new year or dry January or any of these other times when we're supposed to reimagine ourselves. I just woke up one day in May of 2016 feeling like, nope, a new thing is going to begin, and I don't know what it is, but this phase is done. It was as if my heart opened like a clam to spit out one belief and await a better one. I knew what happened is that I finally actually wanted to change, wanted to believe something new, to become a non drinker rather than trying to have it both ways. I didn't want to drink less or to drink like a quote unquote normal person. I wanted to be done with the whole thing entirely. There was no willpower involved. When you believe a new thing, you don't need a lot of effort. It's the believing that relieves you of worrying about endless tiny decisions that eat away at sanity and attention, constantly testing your will. Or I'm going to leave it there for you, RJ. Tell us what struck you so much about this article.
Well, first, I just loved the title because I want to change. There are things about myself that I don't like and I know are harmful to me and to other people. And yet I find myself often with a marked lack of willpower or self-discipline. And so this idea of changing without willpower, I just love the title. And then as I read it, she's basically describing conversion experience, and she can't explain what happened. It's something like the Holy Spirit coming into your life and making you a new creation, that there was something just so true about what happened here and about sort of swapping one story out for another, swapping one belief out for another. I thought this was an interesting take on what we talk a lot about in the Mockingbird world and, the Bible, justification by faith. That she is delivered from the power of alcohol because she, by the grace of God, comes to believe a different story about herself and about the world. And I know people who've had experiences like this. I knew someone in college who was not at all interested in becoming a Christian and had a very I talked about this person before, I had a very specific idea about what life was about. It was about achievement. It was about degrees and self-fulfillment and career. And because of that, she sort of pushed all need for love and affection and relationship out of the picture because that was going to be detrimental to her accomplishing the goals which really mattered. And then she read some Christian books, and it said that actually love was the most important thing in the universe and the only thing that mattered, and that's what Jesus was about. And it helped her to recognize this need and this desire that she thought she needed to sort of get rid of as something that she needed to embrace. And her story completely changed, and her life completely changed. So I loved that, and then I loved also what it sort of said about sin. That the reason it reminded me of what Robert Fair Capon wrote. There's a Mockingbird post about this from a few years back called Capon Closes Down the Religion Shop. And he says, when you start preaching the gospel of free grace, people are always like, well, what's going to keep you from sinning? Why won't you just go out and sin? And he writes, the reason for not going out and sinning all you like is the same as the reason for not going out and putting your nose in a slicing machine. It's just such a graphic image. It makes me think of the deli counter every time. It's dumb, stupid, and no fun. Some individual sins may have pleasure still attached to them because of the residual goodness of the realities they are abusing. Adultery can indeed be pleasant, and tying one on can amuse. But betrayal, jealousy, love grown cold, and the gray dawn of the morning after are nobody's idea of a good time. And that at the end of the day, sin isn't fun, and it kills you and it puts you to death. But what changes you is being embraced by this truth that you are loved in spite of the fact that you're sinning. And this is the last thing I'll say, just the whole approach to ethics, that the vast majority of what we hear in the world is an Aristotelian approach to ethics, right? If you want to be different, you do different. Action changes the heart. And that's just completely wrong. And it's the opposite of what Jesus says, the opposite of what this article says. The truth is that the heart, if you want to change the action, you got to change the heart. That's how things actually work. And that's what happened to this woman. Somehow, miraculously, her heart changed. And so then her action changed. And she even says, she's like, I've lost all faith in willpower. Like, willpower doesn't get anything done, except maybe in very brief emergency situations. And I just think she's exactly 100% right. And so in my own life, and probably the life of hopefully some of our listeners, I find this whole changing your mind narrative change to come into effect when I get myself in a rut and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Where am I going? I got to make a change. I got to hurry up. I got to figure this stuff out. And I get all worked up. And then I remember, no. There's a God in heaven who loves you, who knows exactly what he's doing. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. And when you're supposed to be somewhere different or be doing something different, you will, because he's in charge and not you. And then I find peace and hope and joy enter my life, as opposed to anxiety and reactivity and all the sorts of emotions that make me want to behave badly. So I just thought there was a lot of truth in this article, and I loved it. I loved it.
Sarah, you want to chime in?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure I can say. I mean, what RJ said is so spot on with this. I mean, I love that idea that this gives people that she was given an entirely different way of seeing the world, like basically overnight, and that really is. I mean, for me, that's how I remember feeling when I found Mockingbird. Was like once, and I'd had some theological education at that point, but the way she sort of talks about quitting drinking and how there was this like, like all the little laws, right? Like, what if it's a special occasion and does this count as drinking, and all these sort of things that if you're using willpower, are constantly haunt you. Christianity can feel that way when you're working under the law of having to prove yourself to God every day. Christianity feels that way.
What music can I listen to? What TV shows can I watch? Exactly. Oh my God, can I say that word?
Exactly.
What if I don't have my quiet time?
Only I was in the liberal version of that, which was like, what protest do I need to be in? What book do I need to be angry about? You know what I mean? Like, where's my safe space? Like that was what was like made me so angry. I mean, I can remember coming back from seminary, like just, on a regular Wednesday, and my husband picked me up at the train and I couldn't breathe. I mean, it took me an hour and a half to get home and I still couldn't breathe because all of the sort of manic energy around this is the perfect way to be Christian. Also here are all the boundaries you need to put up. You know what I mean? Like this is the way it's going to work. And then like going to Mockingbird for the first time and reading the stuff on the site, I was like, oh my God, like, literally, oh my God, like this is not resting on me anymore. Like this is not mine to carry. Like I don't, these aren't actually even the questions that need to be answered. There aren't actually any questions to answer. It is just that I get to live in this reality. I mean,
yes.
We're doing our, we have signs that face the street at my husband's church, and we've been trying to figure out what the hell to put on them, especially like our Easter signs, because our Easter signs we like to leave up through the summer, and so we wanted to say something good. And I finally just called Jacob Smith at Calvary St. George's and was like, hey man, can we use enjoy your forgiveness? Because that's like the greatest sign ever. And Jake was like so sweet and totally said, yes, take it. But that's what this feels like, right? When you've had the whole context change, you're like, oh, I'm just gonna, like, she's like, I'm just gonna enjoy not drinking. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm just gonna enjoy my forgiveness. And the world and the church will tell you, you've got to control that. We've got to control it from the pulpit. We've got to tell you what to do and how to do it. And like the moment you hear that BS, you just need to like find a new place, because that's not what it's about. It's about enjoying what you've been given, this great gift.
I love at the end, she says, for me, it felt like a brief moment on a random Thursday. My real self peeked out from between the clouds, asking for something else. We're going to die, it was saying. Give us something better to believe. And I think that's, frankly, like the quote unquote narrative of that most of the world that kind of lives on, which is this do more, try harder, you get out what you put in kind of thing. it's so immediately attractive because of the control it offers a person, but it also kills you. It really does consume you,
Mhm.
and give me something better to believe. I mean, that's what this. I mean, I can't help but read it in light of my book, and that's what it really is all about. That we're
Mm.
these things, these belief systems that we don't even call belief systems. That's how successful they are. They've created situations where they're killing us, and it's like, what? Give me something better to believe, something that not a better way to act, but something that's not gonna destroy me, basically. And by the way, Sarah, I thought I guess my suggestion got shot down. Was like for the Holy Spirit signs was cradle Episcopalian question mark, keep driving.
Perfect.
Home of
That
the
one
church
will
lady.
haunt me forever.
Sorry.
Forever.
Well-
You know what? I just want us to like, I mean, you guys can edit this stuff out because I know we're going on about this piece, but it is, I honestly, RJ, when I first read it, I was like, okay. And then like I heard you talk about it, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm seeing what he's seeing. Like we should really be advocating for sick sick day Christianity. Do you know what I mean? Like we should all be advocating for the kind of Christianity you can do when you've like got the flu and like you're in bed and you
Sick day Christianity.
Yeah.
That's your next
Or
book,
when you're
Sarah.
like, hanging on a cross for like sins you've actually committed and you're about to die,
I just
or
I'm
you just
like-
committed murder.
right.
Well, okay. We're gonna go from this conversation into a different one. The talk about atonement and talking about apology, Sarah. I don't think we could have found a better thing to open the new year on a note of profoundest hope than this interview that you sent us with Christianity Today had with
Holy moly.
Linda Barkman. Linda Barkman is now Dr. Barkman, I guess.
Mhm.
She is a woman who was incarcerated for 30 years because she was found guilty for aiding and abetting her boyfriend who killed her 2-year-old daughter.
Unspeakable.
It's unspeakable. She was found guilty of a felony of child endangerment, basically just for living with the man. And when the California Supreme Court set the verdict aside and she was retired, the prosecution successfully argued for implied malice, meaning she should have known what the boyfriend could do to her toddler, and she was in prison for 30 years, and she served that time. Anyway, today she has her PhD in intercultural studies, and her dissertation explores the gap in communication between women in prison and the volunteers who minister to them. Christianity Today is asking her story. She says, I grew up unchurched. I came to Christ when my oldest daughter was a babe in arms, but it didn't work very well. I was going to a church where when they found that I was living with a man I wasn't married to, I was told by the associate pastor's wife that she could no longer teach Bible study in my home because she couldn't enter the home of a sinner. That pushed me away. I was already pregnant with my second child at that point. I ended up leaving him because he was an abusive alcoholic and drug abuser, but I found somebody worse than him. One day, I asked God to do whatever he needed to do to make things right in my life because I just knew how wrong everything was and how miserable I was. At the end of that day, the man I was living with beat my 2-year-old daughter to death. I wanted to die. And God said, no, you're not allowed to die. I was so angry at God. I remember screaming out to him, you say you can make me a new creation out of me, so you have to turn me into somebody I can live with. I don't know what part is good, what part is not. All I know is everybody who has ever loved me or been loved by me is now hurt, and I just don't know what to do. After that, God started showing me that he could use me if I'd stop fighting. It took a long time. I began to see Jesus and his love and mercy in the day-to-day things. Not long after I got to prison, I started helping with church services in the psychiatric unit. For 28 of the 30 years I was incarcerated, I was the lay pastor for that prison unit. Prison is a pretty good seminary in a lot of ways. One of the women I interviewed for my dissertation told me, I had a 27-year retreat. People don't understand it, but you do. Jesus was with me every single day of those 27 years. And she finishes, she says, when I got to prison, I was labeled a baby killer. I bought the jury's decision, saying that I was Amy's mother and I did not protect her. How was I not guilty? The first person who ever told me I was a battered woman was a woman in a death penalty case who, after 17 years, was totally exonerated. But I didn't believe her. I still wrestle with it. When I was introduced at the Fuller Seminary graduation, where she spoke, as somebody who unjustly spent 30 years in prison, I didn't know how to cope. I struggle. I'm in therapy. I have post traumatic stress disorder from prison issues. I don't know if I can believe in redemption for myself. But David was a murderer, and Saul consented to Stephen's stoning, and Joseph spent a lot of time in prison. God has a special place for prisoners and can use us because of our brokenness. The interviewer then asks her, how do you pray for the people that you minister to in prison? And she closes by saying, we know that knowing Christ in prison makes us freer than many people walking the streets who don't know Jesus. So I pray for the strength to know that every moment that he allows me to minister in prison is an opportunity to love those that he loves. I mean, I don't know how a person like that is standing, let alone speaking and preaching. She is this. She goes on. She talks about her new ministry and the new husband that she met, who's Mennonite, and this restoration. Prison as seminary, redemption for someone. The very day God answered her prayer in the worst possible way, or maybe God wasn't God answering her prayer. Maybe because she talks about it was the devil who possessed that man, and she talks about having to maybe seeing him if he's redeemed, that she believes he can be the man who murdered her child. That maybe that he won't be the one that the devil had a hold of that day. I don't really know what to make of it, or maybe we don't need to put an interpretive gloss on it. Just to say that it is incredibly. What a gift this woman is, but I'd like to hear actually more from you guys about it.
Erin Jean Ward sent me this piece. She's written a piece for us recently, so she is who brought it to my attention. I love this piece for so many reasons. Her honest take about redemption and forgiveness reminded me a bit of the piece that we talked about that David Peters wrote. About accidentally murdering someone with his car. This kind of resonated in a similar way to me of like struggling with redemption, struggling with what it means to be forgiven. The other thing, I can't not say this, and it's a at Mockingbird we get a little defensive when we talk too badly about men. So I need to say this as someone. I've worked in prison ministry a lot. I did that a lot in New York. I worked at a prison up there that actually allowed women to have their children with them in prison, and was incredibly powerful. I have not met a woman in prison that is there because she did something on her own. I've only met women in prison who are there because they were in a bad relationship. They had a bad dad. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, people don't like us to talk about gender that way, and we get a little anxious at Mockingbird if we talk about sin that way, because I'm not saying that women are sinless, but her story was very powerful to me, and because I think that I actually think we don't say that out loud at all, which is really weird. You'll hear it in little pockets of people who work in women's prisons, but no one wants, because the ramifications for that are so huge in so many ways. When you talk about gender's predilection towards violence, for example, and, you know, women being the gentler sex. I mean, but her story is very, very true to a lot of stories in women's prisons. And I kind of just personally feel like I need to hold that up. I don't know if that's useful at all, but it's important to me.
I just watched that Showtime series, Escape from Dannemora, which is about prison, and there's the men's prison versus the female prison is like I don't even know. You can't even describe the difference. It's so different.
It's like not even the same institution.
Although it does an
level.
incredible job of showing the inhumanity that men show and the inhumanity that women show in different.
Yeah, I think we all watched. I stopped watching at some point because it just became too salacious. But we all watched Orange Is the New Black, and when we talk about women's prisons, we often have this like fun vision of it or something, and it's just an incredibly brutal existence. It was so nice to see that they, you know, she talked about how they worship several times a day. I mean, it's very almost monastic, several times a day, every day. So powerful, but it's still prison.
I don't know what to say. Her ability to serve and love when she's just been emptied of everything. and the woman she talks about, the women that she partnered with in ministry, and the lack of ego, and just the love and the desire to just serve and love other people and not have it be at all about them and about their own personal fulfillment or something. Here's someone who's been crucified,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and because of that, there's sort of a freedom and a genuineness. And it reminds me, I don't know, at some point early in my ministry life, I realized that all of my real heroes in ministry had really, really dark times.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I sort of wanted that. And on the other hand, I was like, please, God, don't do that to me. you know? But there is some sort of connection between going through dark times and a freedom on the other side, freedom from ego, a freedom from self, a death to self. I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Galatians 2:20. That's just true. But it's awful. It's another one of those like awful, wonderful, hopeful, terrible truths. But just to see it in her, yeah.
She sounds amazing. I mean, I just like was, you think that look at the clear of the ministry that has been birthed out of this absolutely, there's no words to put to this to the
No.
experience she had. There's just
No
no words.
words.
But something like that seems to have ushered forth something that's not just purely revenge or hatred or self-loathing or just more death. Is kind of I just want to let's just hold that up. That's
Right.
sort of insane that we live in a world where that's even possible, where God could work in that way. So it's Linda Barkman. Thank you. I hope and now she's Dr. Parkman, and she and her husband both, and she sounds like she's really in love with this man, and she's I mean,
It's so if you're a clergy spouse, like it's just worth reading the end of this, because
Yes.
with the way she says, she's like, I met him in a seminary classroom. He's a Mennonite, a pacifist. He's just a marvel. He once answered a pastor's question, "What do you really want to be in life?" with the answer, "A pastor's husband." He says his ministry is to drive the car. That means he drives the car in Tijuana traffic and takes me where I need to go and puts me back together. I mean, this is like, I
Amazing.
got it. We run into so many sort of things, and it's well-meaning, where they want to bring in a clergy spouse to talk to seminarians, and they always pick the angry ones. And I don't know why. They always pick the ones who are like, "This is the worst. You're gonna hate it. It's not fun.
Boundaries.
You can't."
Boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries. And I'm like, call a guy that likes to drive the car to Tijuana. Like, why? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, if you're, and I'm not saying everybody's married to a pastor is called into that by all means, and you're not required to, and all those caveats that make people feel better in these modern times. But if you are called into it, it's like, this is a picture of joy, right? And such a beautiful marriage.
Amen to that. Well, why don't we just end there? Ethan will put it in the Weekender tomorrow, and we can sort of just reread, and then I got to find some videos of this lady. She just sounds like 30
Yeah.
years. I mean, 30 years. And by the way, watching Escape from Dannemora was not a endorsement of other people watching it. I'm deeply disturbed. But we'll talk in a couple weeks. Any parting shots, guys?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year, one and all.
Down with the Cowboys and Patriots. Happy New Year.
All right, I'm going to stop my recording.
I hate hockey.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.